Two Hells Angels bikers were found bound to a frozen pine deep inside Clearwater National Forest. Snow clung to their faces, turning bruises into purple shadows. Ropes cut deep into their arms, forcing them upright against the icy bark as the cold crept in to finish what violence had begun. Beside them lay footprints, half buried, proof that whoever left them there had walked away without looking back. No calls went out. No rescue team was coming. The forest had already decided their fate. Then a Navy SEAL on a solo mission slowed his steps. The air felt wrong, too silent, too still. He had come only to retrieve a fallen drone lost in the storm, but the snow beneath his boots told a different story. Something human, something urgent, something no training had ever prepared him to face. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit subscribe so you never miss another tale of survival, redemption, and heart. Your support truly means the world. A gray winter sky hung low over Clearwater National Forest, its heavy clouds pressing the world into silence. Snow drifted through the pines like pale ash, settling on branches bent from December weight. A cold wind moved beneath the canopy, thin as a wire, carrying the bite of distant ice fields. The forest, usually alive with rustling life, felt hollow and waiting, as though the winter itself were holding its breath. Luke Harris paused at the tree line, drawing in a slow breath that stung the back of his throat. At 35, he carried the calm of a man shaped by violence and discipline. He stood tall, just over 6 feet, with a frame carved by years of rigorous training. Compact shoulders, powerful legs, no wasted mass. His face was defined by sharp angles, a strong jaw roughened by 2 days of unshaven dark stubble, thin lips pressed into a thoughtful line, and pale gray eyes that studied the world with quiet calculation. Strands of dark hair, shot through with premature silver at the temples, curled against his forehead in the cold. There was something guarded about him, something built from years spent in deserts, jungles, mountains, and sand-choked alleyways where silence meant survival. The weight of that silence clung to him still. Beside him, Shadow moved with a predator's grace. The 5-year-old German shepherd held his head low, nose tracking subtle currents under the snow. His thick black and tan coat rippled with each step. Muscles shifted beneath fur dense enough to catch falling flakes that clung without melting. His amber eyes were alert, intelligent, and sharp with military focus. Trained for combat deployment, Shadow carried invisible scars, nights of helicopter rotors, sudden gunfire, metal corridors, and voices shouting commands. But here in the cold wilderness, he seemed calmer, though a tension hummed beneath his ribs. Readiness, not fear. Luke continued forward, every step deliberate, pressing through the deep powder that muffled sound. His breath puffed out in short bursts, caught briefly in the air before dissolving. He had come here for something simple: recover a reconnaissance drone that had gone down 3 days earlier during a storm. A routine assignment. Nothing about it should have required more than a day's work. But Winter had a way of rewriting plans. His handheld receiver flashed. The drone's signal was faint but present. Every time he angled the device, the blinking icon strengthened. He followed its guidance deeper along a narrow trail that wove between cedar and pine. The snow thickened, rising above his boots. Underfoot, something shifted, an impression in the whiteness, shallow but wrong. Luke stopped. Shadow's ears swept forward, body going still. Luke knelt, brushing away snow. A line of compressed marks stretched ahead, faint but unmistakable. At first glance, someone might mistake them for animal tracks. But Luke had spent years reading ground the same way others read text. These prints lacked the randomness of wildlife. They were evenly spaced, straight, deliberate. Boot prints, at least 2 different sets. Deep enough to hold shape despite snowfall, recent. Within hours, a ripple of memory ran through him, brief and unwelcome. The same kind of trail he once tracked through Afghan foothills, where signs of human passage led either to rescue or ambush. Old adrenaline flickered in his veins, a cold current beneath the winter air. He stood slowly, scanning the surrounding forest. No motion, no voices, only the whisper of snow. Shadow shifted closer and let out a low growl. Not loud, not warning, just awareness. Luke touched the dog's shoulder gently, grounding him. "Easy," he murmured, voice rough with cold. Shadow's growl faded, but his posture remained rigid. Luke's gaze followed the prints deeper into a darker stretch of trees, where the branches knitted tightly, blocking wind. Something else appeared there, drag marks, faint furrows in the snow that did not follow the boot tracks exactly. Something heavy, pulled or pushed. Luke felt a tightening in his chest. The drone was no longer the priority. They moved forward, senses sharpened. The forest grew darker as the pines thickened, snow now falling slower, caught in the branches overhead. The air was too still, as if sound itself feared to move. Then Shadow froze, head angled toward a cluster of trees up ahead. His growl returned, deeper. Luke followed his stare. At first he saw nothing, only the dark bark of a massive pine. Then threads of brown rope emerged in the shadows, wrapped around the trunk. He stepped closer, boots crunching lightly, heart hammering in a controlled rhythm. The shapes came into focus, two men bound to opposite sides of the same tree, their heads slumped forward, arms secured high behind them. Snow collected on their shoulders and hair. Their breath, faint and ragged, fogged the cold air. The first man, the older, was large, shoulders wide beneath a torn leather jacket. His beard was thick, tangled with melting snow, streaked with gray along the chin. Dark bruises covered his cheekbones, dried blood crusted at the corner of his nose. The Hells Angels insignia, half ripped from his jacket, clung stubbornly to one sleeve. His name would come later, but even unconscious, he radiated the hard defiance of someone who had lived fast and never apologized for it. The second man was smaller, leaner, but his muscles were defined beneath his ragged shirt. His long, dark hair, tied back at the base of his neck, had partly come loose, strands whipping across his cheek. A black tattoo traced the side of his neck, the ink stark against skin gone pale with cold. His lips had taken on a bluish tint, dangerously cold. He shivered, breath shallow and uneven. Both men were bound cruelly. The ropes had cut into their wrists and arms, leaving red grooves that would freeze if left much longer. Their legs trembled under their weight. Every detail spoke of violence. The bruises, the dried blood, the tight knots, the silent forest that surrounded them like a witness. Luke's pulse beat harder now, but his mind stayed calm. Years of service had taught him that emotion could wait, lives could not. Shadow moved to flank him, ears forward, tail low, waiting for direction. Two Hells Angels bikers, tied to a tree deep in Clearwater Forest in the dead of winter, abandoned to the snow. Whoever left them wanted them found frozen, not buried, a warning or a message. Luke drew closer, snow brushing his knees, breath steadying. The larger man stirred, trying to lift his head. A hoarse sound broke from his throat, almost too faint to hear. The smaller man's eyes twitched beneath half-closed lids. Luke felt the moment settle into him, weighty and irreversible. The drone was no longer a mission. This was now about survival. Two strangers on the edge of death, with questions buried in the snow around them. He reached for his knife. Shadow pressed forward, muscles coiled. The storm thickened. The forest held its breath. Luke made his choice. Snowflakes swirled through the trees, stinging Luke Harris's face as he cut the last knot of frozen rope from Cole Ramirez's wrists. Jake Miller slumped forward with a heavy groan, frost clinging to his beard. Cole's head lolled against the tree trunk. Both men were half-conscious, breath rattling in their chests. Luke pressed his gloved fingers to their necks, weak pulses, but present. The wind howled through the forest like a distant engine, blowing columns of white across the path he had come. There was no time to hesitate. He shrugged off his thick military jacket, splitting it between their shaking frames to preserve what body heat was left. The cold sank through his base layers instantly, needles of pain running up his arms, but he didn't flinch. Shadow, the German shepherd, circled close, scanning the tree line, tail low, body taut as cable. The dog's breath steamed in the frigid air, ears pricked for danger. Luke tapped two fingers against Shadow's flank, a silent command. The dog trotted ahead, paws sinking into the deepening snow, nose sweeping low, seeking the narrow ridge path he remembered. Luke slung Cole's arm over his shoulder, hefting half the man's weight as Jake, leaning heavily to the side, stumbled beside him. Both men trembled with exhaustion and cold, their boots dragged like anchors across the blank white ground. Jake's voice rasped, barely audible. "Tell me this ain't a hallucination." Luke didn't answer. Talk wasted heat. Talk wasted breath. He guided them through the timber, choosing the most sheltered path, one that hugged the shadow of the ravine wall. Snow accumulated on their shoulders, their hair, their lashes. Cole shivered violently. Jake's teeth chattered, lips purpling further. Pain rose in Luke's calves and thighs as he trudged onward, the strain slick with old memory. forced marches in freezing rain, wind cutting through soaked fatigues, lungs burning, refusing to stop because stopping meant never moving again. Shadow paused at a bend, tail stiff, nose angled toward the air. Luke sensed it instantly. Something was near, something unseen. He slowed, eyes narrowing. The forest was silent except for the wind, no breath or crunch beyond their own. Whatever Shadow smelled wasn't danger that moved. It was the echo of people who had come before, tracks faint beneath the snowfall, a remnant of someone else crossing these woods with intent. Luke pushed the thought aside. First, warmth. First, life. Ahead, nestled into a seam where two stone ridges met, stood the cabin. Smoke drifted from its chimney in thin ribbons, nearly blending with the snow. Its rustic outline, squared timbers and narrow windows, offered neither beauty nor comfort, just survival. Luke felt tension ease a fraction. Almost there, he muttered to Jake and Cole, though neither heard him clearly. Shadow bounded forward and scratched the cabin door once. Luke followed, dragging Cole with difficulty. Jake, stumbling at his side, he knocked. The door swung open almost at once. Henry Walker stood framed in the warm glow of lamplight. The old man had a tall, lean build, his narrow shoulders wrapped in a thick wool sweater patched at the elbows. Gray hair fell past his ears in loose strands, while a matching beard framed a face carved by decades of wind, sun, and solitude. His blue eyes, sharp and steady, flicked over the three newcomers, Luke soaked through with frost, two battered bikers half frozen, and a military K-9 dripping snow on the threshold. His expression barely shifted, but something like understanding moved behind his gaze. Henry was a former forest ranger, once known for his calm authority and dedication to the land. Though the years had eroded his connection to people, he had retreated from town years earlier, finding peace in silence rather than conversation. Life had carved him inward, loss, whispers of a tragedy long past, and the self-imposed sentence of a man who'd chosen solitude over forgiveness. Yet beneath the gruff exterior, a sense of duty remained. "Get them inside," Henry said simply. His voice was low and rough with age, but clear. Luke felt a weary relief wash through him. They carried Jake and Cole into the small main room, the warmth burning their skin with sharp pins. A stone fireplace filled half the wall, flames crackling through seasoned pine. Henry shut the door behind them, then moved briskly. No hesitation, no questions. He grabbed dry blankets from a cedar trunk and tossed them across the sofa and wooden bench. Luke lowered Cole onto the bench, while Jake sank onto the sofa with a harsh groan, leaning back as heat rolled into his frozen bones. Shadow curled near the hearth, shaking snow from his coat, ears angled toward every small sound. Cole's eyes fluttered open. He looked around the room, the wood-paneled walls lined with tools, lanterns, rope, old photos curled at corners. A narrow table strewn with a deck of cards and an unfinished carving of a mountain cat, and a single rifle hanging over the doorframe, oiled and well cared for. The place looked lived in, but not cluttered, a sanctuary built from habit. Cole breathed a ragged sigh. "Didn't think my last stop would have furniture," he whispered. Jake managed a dry, pained chuckle, though his face contorted. "Don't get comfortable. Could still be hell." Luke ignored them, quickly removing their wet boots and socks. Their feet were pale, nearly bloodless, but sensation remained, good. Frostbite hadn't taken them. Henry returned with a tin kettle and set it above the fire. Steam soon rose, bringing the smell of mint and something herbal. "You carried these men through that storm?" Henry asked quietly. Luke nodded once, exhausted. "K-9 helped," Luke replied, glancing at Shadow. The dog lifted his head, eyes bright with lingering alertness. Henry's gaze softened a little. "Brave dog." Jake shifted, pain cracking through his voice. "Why help us?" he muttered. "We look like the kind that ruins property values." Henry knelt beside him, unwrapping a bandage roll. "Because you're alive," he answered, "and alive is worth saving." Luke watched them, noting how strange the moment was. Three men who had never exchanged words under ordinary circumstances now sharing the same flickering heat, stitched together by necessity. The storm rattled the cabin windows, and for the first time since he'd entered the forest, Luke allowed his body to sag against the wall. Jake's eyes slid shut, surrendering to warmth. Cole stared into the fire, silent, lost somewhere between fear and gratitude. Shadow rested his head on his paws, confident enough to sleep, though his tail remained curled toward the door. Outside, the storm deepened. Inside, heat and breath filled the room with fragile life. Luke knew the danger wasn't over, but for now, even if only for a night, survival had won. The fire crackled low in Henry Walker's cabin, filling the single room with the scent of burning pine. Outside, the storm hammered the roof, a relentless percussion of sleet and wind that rattled the windows and kept the darkness pressed close to the walls. Jake Miller lay sunk into the sofa, blanket wrapped around his shoulders, the heat loosening the rigidity in his jaw. Cole Ramirez sat hunched on the wooden bench near the hearth, eyes half-lidded but alert, his thin frame shivering even beneath the layers. Luke Harris leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, shoulders aching from the long trek. Shadow slept nearby, chest rising steadily, paws twitching as if chasing something across the frozen landscape behind his eyelids. Henry moved quietly from shelf to table, placing steaming mugs in front of each man without comment. His hands, though slender, bore knotted veins and the faint tremble of age. The lines carved into his face softened as the firelight brushed across them. No one spoke at first. The warmth gave space for silence, but silence soon began to feel heavy, too heavy. Jake was the one who broke it. He cleared his throat, the sound rough as gravel. "You should know why they left us out there." His voice wavered, caught between bitterness and resignation. His gaze lingered on the fire rather than the faces around him. Jake, in the glow of the flames, looked older than his 38 years. The ruffled beard, salted with gray, shadowed cheeks bruised purple. His brown eyes, normally sharp, rebellious, held a faint tremor. "Our club was helping protect a pipeline," he began. "Illegal game shipments, antlers, pelts, meat, the kind of stuff rich folks pretend they don't buy." Luke watched him closely, jaw tensed, though he said nothing. Jake continued. "Cole and I weren't into it. We didn't sign up for killing animals for cash." Cole let out a tired laugh, the sound brittle. "We even cut loose a couple of critters when no one was watching. Thought we were doing some noble outlaw thing." His voice, usually sharp-edged, softened. Cole was 32, lean and wiry, tattoos curling like inked vines along his neck and arms. A man shaped by the road and the persona he'd carved for survival, but in that moment he looked fragile, eyes rimmed red by cold and memory. "We thought we'd get away with it," he said quietly. "Turns out our brothers thought otherwise." Jake clenched his mug, knuckles whitening. "They dragged us out there, tied us up, said the storm would finish the job." His words swelled with anger, but beneath it lay a tremor of fear. That wasn't punishment, that was murder with a message. Luke shifted his weight, expression unreadable. He'd heard stories like that in distant war zones, loyalty twisted into threat, brotherhood into weapon. He felt something flicker in his chest, then settle. Saving these men had not been an accident. Henry stood near the fire, staring into the flames. His posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, like a cord pulled taut. "The forest doesn't forgive that kind of blood," he murmured. His voice was low, thick with something unspoken. Jake turned toward him, brow furrowed. "You talk like you know." "I do," Henry replied. The wind outside moaned, rattling the window panes. The fire hissed as sap burst inside the burning wood. Henry pulled a chair toward the table and lowered himself onto it, exhaling slowly. His tall, angular frame looked suddenly smaller. The silver-gray hair that fell near his shoulders glinted in the firelight. At 65, the man still carried the outline of a life once lived in motion. Broad strides, wide shoulders, but the weight of solitude bent him now. "I worked these woods for 30 years, Henry said. "Forest Service, wildlife enforcement. My wife, Sarah, and our son lived with me here." His voice grew rough at the edges. "Until the fire." Jake and Cole exchanged glances. Luke watched Henry's face, seeing a flicker in his eyes, not just pain, but longing. Henry clasped his hands together on the table, fingers tightening. "One night, the cabin went up in flames while I was out tracking poachers. Sarah was alone with our boy. I came back to ashes. I found nothing but rumors. Neighbors said they saw bodies. Nothing was ever confirmed." His breath trembled, barely visible. "I believed it. I buried myself here, and I have stayed ever since." Silence thickened again. Cole's gaze snapped toward Jake. "Show him," he whispered. Jake frowned. "Show him what?" Cole reached into the pocket of the jacket they'd peeled off earlier and pulled out a tattered leather wallet, stiff with dried snow. He handed it to Jake. Jake hesitated, then flipped it open. Inside lay a faded photograph, edges curled from years of friction. Jake stared at it a long moment, his face tightening. Luke stepped closer. "What is it?" Jake swallowed. "A memory." His voice cracked. "Didn't know why I still carried it." Cole shook his head. "You did." Jake handed the photograph to Henry. The old man took it carefully, turning it toward the firelight. It showed a small wooden cabin, this one, unmistakably, behind a boy no older than 5, bundled in a winter coat, dark hair cut unevenly, smiling gap-toothed at the camera. A younger Forest Service ranger knelt beside him, arm around the child's shoulders. That ranger's face was unmistakable. Henry Walker, decades younger. Henry stared at the image, eyes widening. His hand trembled, the photo fluttering. This was taken here," he whispered. "That boy." Jake clenched his jaw, throat tight. "That's me." The room held its breath. Shadow woke with a soft whine, sensing the sudden surge of emotion. Jake's voice thickened with old anger. "My mother told me about a ranger who tried to help us, that he stopped my father from hurting us. Said we stayed here a while before the fire, but she always believed that ranger disappeared, left us." Henry's eyes shone in the firelight, grief rippling through his features. "I thought you both were dead. I never—" Jake cut him off. "I grew up believing you walked away, and I became everything I promised I wouldn't." Henry stared at him, stunned. Something deep inside him broke open, a collapse of years held together by denial. The storm outside wailed, and the fire flickered low, its light shaky and soft. Luke remained silent, watching the truth land like snow on fragile branches. Cole gazed into the flames, jaw clenched, perhaps feeling the weight of a story bigger than any of them expected. The past, long buried beneath the ice of years and silence, had surfaced with brutal clarity. Shadow snapped awake first. His ears shot up, his black and tan fur bristling as he rose from the hearth, a rumbling growl swelling low in his chest. His amber eyes locked on the door, muscles tight, tail rigid. Luke Harris lifted his head at once, posture instantly alert, fatigue washed clean from his expression. Danger had a sound, and Shadow had heard it, the crunch of snow beneath boots that didn't belong to any wounded biker or forest wanderer. "Quiet," Luke whispered, raising a hand. His pale gray eyes narrowed, focusing not on the cabin's warm interior, but on the darkness outside. The storm had not eased. Wind roared along the ravine, flinging snow in violent spirals. Yet beneath the storm's chaos, other sounds cut through. Approaching footsteps, measured and coordinated, muffled voices, beams of flashlights slicing briefly between trees before darkening again. Jake Miller strained upright, groaning from the pain in his shoulders and ribs. His thick beard glistened with sweat, though cold seeped into his bones. Cole Ramirez gripped the edge of his bench to steady himself. His tattoos rippled as his muscles tensed. His black hair clung damply to his neck. Luke rose from his place against the wall, movements clean and controlled. They came back to finish it. Henry Walker, tall and thin as a winter branch, set his mug down with trembling fingers. His blue eyes shifted toward the back door. Without speaking, he crossed the room and checked the hinges, an instinct drilled from decades defending remote land. "We won't hold long in here," he murmured. But first, they had to survive long enough to escape. Luke moved quickly. "Henry, rear door and trail. Jake and Cole, window and reload. Shadow, down." The dog dropped instantly, belly pressed to the floor, tail flicking once in acknowledgement. Luke's voice hardened. "No shots unless necessary." Jake checked the revolver Henry had given him. His thick hands, though shaking, worked with memory burned into muscle. Years on the road. Weapons fired not just for show, but survival. He checked the cylinder, jaw tight. 2 bullets, he muttered. "Beautiful." Cole gathered loose rounds from the table. His movements were sharp, teeth gritted, even weakened. His body still remembered how to fight. "It's enough to make a point," he said, though his face was pale beneath bruises. Outside, heavy footsteps circled closer. The beams of flashlights flickered again through the cabin window. Then silence, worse than noise. Luke counted under his breath. 3, 4, 5. The first gunshot cracked like ice splitting. Glass shattered across the floor in glittering shards as a round punched through the window frame. Jake flinched but did not drop. Cole ducked low, pulling him beneath the windowsill. Shadow barked sharply, then stilled, staring at the doorway as though seeing something inside the storm. Luke leaned to the wall beside the broken window, raised his rifle, and fired once, controlled, precise. The muzzle flash illuminated the room in a brief flash of heat. Outside, a shout echoed as the attackers scattered to avoid direct fire. Henry stepped away from the back wall, breath shaking with adrenaline. Though 65 and long retired, his body still remembered conflict. He slipped to the narrow side window, peering through frost-ringed glass. Shadows moved between the trunks, dodging behind cover. "They know what they're doing," he said quietly. "Not amateurs." Luke fired 2 more shots, measured, not reckless, forcing the attackers back again. Snow flurried through the holes in the window frame, wind screaming. Then a dull metallic clink hit the porch. Luke's eyes widened. "Grenade!" The blast shook the cabin, sending splinters, snow, and soil exploding along the porch. The shock startled Shadow, who yelped and slid back, paws scrambling. Jake threw an arm over his face, cursing. Cole hit the floor hard, lungs emptied by fear and force. Without thinking, Shadow lunged toward Jake, planting himself between man and flying debris. Wood and stone clipped the dog's flank, thrusting him sideways into the snow-dusted floor. He lay still a moment, panting with pain, then dragged himself back into position, eyes trained on the front door. Luke's jaw clenched. This couldn't continue. The cabin would fail, walls would splinter, someone would die. He turned to Henry. "We can't hold this ground." Henry nodded, gaze sharp. The deep lines on his weathered face spoke more clearly than words. "Your place. The uplink." Beyond the storm, Luke's survival cabin waited. A rugged, half-buried shelter with reinforced walls and a satellite transmitter built for military fallback. Reaching it would be deadly. Staying here would be worse. Jake gritted his teeth. "We run? Now?" "We move," Luke corrected, voice iron. "Jake, left side. Cole, right. You cover until we clear the tree line. Henry keeps our rear. Shadow stays with me." They did not debate. With a sudden rush, Luke threw the front door open. The blizzard slammed inward, cold like knives. He ran first into the night, Shadow at heel, Henry just behind, moving surprisingly fast despite age and injury. Jake and Cole fired staggered shots to force space between them and their pursuers. Gunfire flared. Bullets tore through nearby branches. A dog barked from the shadows, loud, vicious, a hunting hound trained to track and pin. The attackers surged forward, shapes flickering between trees, their flashlights jerking like fireflies caught in a storm. Luke led them into the ravine path, breath burning, legs numb, heart steady. Snow blinded the world to 10 feet ahead. Shadow ran close to his knee, limping slightly, but fierce. Behind them, Jake cursed as branches whipped his face. Cole stumbled through fading strength. Henry fired a single round that drove an attacker into cover. The storm swallowed them whole, half seen, figures moving through the white chaos, chased by the roar of boots and the jagged echo of gunfire. They did not look back. Wind hammered the valley as Luke Harris sprinted through the final stretch of forest, boots sinking deep into the snow. Shadow ran beside him, limping slightly, but still swift, ears flattened against the roar of the storm. Jake Miller and Cole Ramirez stumbled behind, their breaths ragged as they fought exhaustion and pain. Henry Walker followed last, moving with stubborn determination despite age and injury, clutching his side where a bruise spread across his ribs. Ahead, barely visible through white darkness, stood the cabin Luke had built years earlier, half embedded into the slope of a hill, a single metal vent protruding from its roof, walls reinforced with steel plating beneath rough-hewn logs. In the chaos of the storm, it looked like a forgotten outpost, crouched low against the earth, waiting. Luke pushed forward, his legs burning. He had built this place for emergencies, a fallback site from an old mission, equipped with basic rations and a satellite uplink. Never once had he imagined using it under circumstances like this, hunted through the wilderness, protecting strangers who were never meant to cross his path. Yet the night had turned them into something else. Not partners, not friends, but survivors tied together by necessity, and, more quietly, hope. They reached the narrow door. Luke shoved it open, guiding the others in. The cabin smelled of old insulation and dust, metal and cedar. Inside, shelves lined the back wall, and a sturdy table sat beneath a narrow window. A radio console and satellite terminal waited at the far end, silent but ready. Shadow scanned the room, tail flicking, then lowered himself to the floor, breathing hard. Luke bolted the door. "Barricade," he said. Jake and Cole moved at once despite shaking muscles. Jake, tall and broad-shouldered, wedged a metal shelving unit against the doorframe. Cole, lean and tattooed, dragged heavy crates into place. Henry grabbed a crowbar from a pile of tools and jammed it across the window latch. A moment of stillness settled inside the cabin. Their hearts thudded against the walls, breaths echoing through the cramped space. Luke moved toward the uplink station, fingers cold but steady as he powered it on. The old screen flickered to life. He keyed in coordinates and tapped out the distress signal. A faint hum answered. "Signal sent," he said quietly. "Hold out." Outside, voices pierced the storm. Shouts muffled by wind, the crunch of approaching boots, the metallic bark of a dog. Jake's jaw clenched. "They didn't quit." "No," Luke replied. "They won't." The first bullet struck a heartbeat later. Wood splintered, the second hit lower, then a full volley of gunfire tore into the cabin, ripping chips and dust from the walls. Everyone hit the floor. Shadow growled, deep and primal, forcing himself upright despite pain. Jake crawled to a side window, glimpsing shapes moving with precision. Their leader stepped into view, a broad, heavy man in a dark, insulated coat and snow goggles. He carried himself with authority, signaling orders with sharp gestures. Though not much was visible, the set of his jaw and the certainty in his movements hinted at a cold intelligence. Henry would later learn his name, Mason Grant, 42, former ranch foreman turned poaching kingpin. Stocky build, windburned face, short beard trimmed to angles, a man who spoke little but controlled fiercely. Mason's ambition and cruelty had carved deep paths through the forest. This wasn't personal to him. It was business. Clean up. Gunfire intensified. Cole jammed another clip into his pistol, knuckles twitching with adrenaline. "We're not getting out of this, are we?" Luke's voice didn't rise, didn't tremble. "We will. Hold the line." Shadow limped to Jake's side and watched the doorway, lips curled back, teeth bared. His injured flank bled through fur, staining snow on the floor. Still, he stood. Then came the final rush. Attackers charged through driving snow, firing as they ran, bullets cracking glass and wood. Luke rose, firing through the narrow slit window, each shot deliberate. Cole supported him, breath ragged. Henry, ignoring pain, positioned himself near the door, rifle gripped tight, ready to protect the younger men with his life. A spray of bullets shattered the cabin's rear wall. Jake swore, dragging Cole aside. Shadow lunged forward as a bullet tore through the air, glancing off metal and sending sharp fragments flying. The dog yelped and staggered, legs buckling, but he remained on his paws. Suddenly, Henry moved. It wasn't calculation. It was instinct ingrained from years as a father and ranger. He lunged toward Jake just as a round ripped through the window. It struck Henry's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He collapsed into Jake's arms, teeth clenched, eyes blazing with pain and fierce resolve. "We're not dying tonight," Henry rasped. Luke fired again, then again, breath burning, rifle hot in his hands. Outside, Mason shouted new orders. More boots thundered forward. Snow erupted under gunfire. Jake squeezed Henry's hand, terror breaking into something harder, determination. And then, rising above the storm like thunder, came a new sound, the rhythmic chopping of rotor blades. At first faint, then unmistakable. Helicopters. Spotlights burst through the blizzard. Voices shouted, different voices. Orders barked through loudspeakers. Gunfire shifted direction. Mason and his men scattered. Federal task forces stormed the clearing, followed by an armed SEAL team in winter combat gear. The rescue flooded in, snowmobiles carving white arcs, rifles glinting under searchlights, shadows moving with practiced precision. Within minutes, the forest fell silent. Luke lowered his rifle as the door flew open. Medics crowded inside. Henry drifted into unconsciousness, bleeding but alive. Shadow collapsed, breath wheezing, but the medic's hands were gentle and sure. Jake and Cole stood stunned as cuffs clicked around their wrists. Not punishment yet, just procedure. But Luke watched their faces. Fear mixed with something cleaner, hope. Days blurred into weeks. The hospital was warm, too warm after the Arctic night. Henry underwent surgery, pale beneath white sheets, but doctors said he'd recover. Shadow endured veterinary treatment. His flank was sutured neatly, though scars would remain, a badge earned. Jake and Cole faced charges, but their cooperation and testimony shattered the poaching ring. They were given a chance at change. Winter softened. Snow thinned. The world exhaled. Months later, on the edge of town near Clearwater Forest, Jake, Cole, and Henry opened a garage. Its sign hung crooked above the door, Second Chance Motors. Oil stained their hands, laughter warmed the air. Henry, still tall but slower, leaned against the doorway as Shadow, Sidisholto, now healed, lay in front of the shop, tail flicking whenever he heard familiar footsteps. Luke visited often. His gray eyes softened each time he saw Shadow sprint forward, or saw Jake and Henry share a clumsy handshake, or heard Cole humming as he wiped grease from chrome. The road behind them had been brutal, but the road ahead? Something new. And in the heart of a winter once filled with death, they found spring. In the end, maybe what happened in those frozen woods wasn't an accident. Maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was a reminder that even in the darkest winters of our lives, the kind where we lose people, lose direction, lose hope, something greater can break through the cold and reach us. Some call it coincidence. Others call it timing. But many of us know a different word, miracle. Because what happened that night was more than sheer survival. A father found the son he thought he had lost forever. A pair of broken men discovered the courage to change direction before it was too late. A loyal dog stood between death and the people he loved. And a Navy SEAL chose compassion over distance, refusing to leave strangers behind in the snow. That kind of grace doesn't happen by chance. Not out here, not ever. Maybe God was there from the beginning. In the storm, in the silence, in the moment, Luke saw those tracks beneath the snow. Maybe God was whispering into their fear, guiding their steps, warming their hearts, even when the cold was trying to take them. And if you're watching this tonight, if you're carrying a loss, or a question, or a hope that feels like it's been buried in ice, let this be your reminder. Nothing is ever truly lost. No road is too broken to walk back. No winter lasts forever. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Share your story, or simply say hello. And if you believe in real stories that heal, stories that remind us we're not alone, we invite you to subscribe so you never walk this road without company. May God bless every person watching. May He protect you, speak to you, and meet you exactly where you are. And may you never forget, when the world feels frozen, miracles still walk in from the snow.